Right. So yesterday we discussed about information security analyst role, right? So what exactly security analysts do, right? So security manager or a security analyst role is all about, and what being an information security analyst in context to the enterprises when we trying to provide security solutions and all is what something which we have discussed in the previous session. Today, as far as the security management role itself is concerned, security analyst role itself is concerned. So we are going to discuss about enterprise security architecture. So when we try to understand about enterprise security architecture majorly focuses on developing an enterprise level security for any of the organization when we are going to develop any kind of solutions, etc., all that stuff. So this is always important for us to understand about the few elements, because when we are trying to develop any enterprise architecture or security architecture for any of the project, there is an approach which normally we call it as top-down approach, because being into security analyst role or security management role, when we are going to develop enterprise security architecture, normally there are two kind of approaches. One is about top-down approach and second is bottom-down approach. Normally, top-down approach is what something which normally we follow when we are trying to implement security architecture. Because when we trying to implement this architecture, which consists of preventing as well as detective and correlative controls by implementing and protecting the infrastructure for enterprise applications, all that. To develop security architecture for this, whatever the kind of directive controls, including the kind of policies and procedures, followed by the kind of security architecture policies, as well as the controls, tools, monitoring, right? So all these things has to be taken into consideration. In this regard, so when we are trying to implement this from the enterprise level transformation or enterprise level security implementation when we are working on, so there are different tools are we using, like, one of the prominent tool we are using called TOGAF. TOGAF is an enterprise architecture framework which normally we use. When we try to develop this security architecture in this regard, so there are few things we need to consider. So one is to identify the business objectives, goals, and strategies. That is one thing which we need to know. What are the different business objectives that enterprise wants to achieve? Followed by this, what are the goals and strategies they wants to implement? At the same time, we need to identify the business attributes which are required to achieve the kind of goals what they have identified. So these business goals may be in short run, these business goals may be in long run. So understanding and identifying the business objectives followed by the kind of goals what they want to achieve. So for that, identification of the business attributes is also one of the key and important element wherein to be understood with. Next, we need to identify the kind of risk which is associated with the attributes so that we can prevent from a business while to achieve those goals, because there are different kinds of risk which is involved in it. Either it can be a schedule risk or it can be of any other. So achieving those risks is also some of the key and important element wherein to be focused. Next is to identify the required controls, whichever is important for us to manage the risk, wherein by defining a program to design and implement those controls, etc. Now, when you try to define and implement the kind of programs and all, there are few things we need to know. So that, let me write down here so that you'll have some idea. Right. So okay, fine. So these are the points we need to know, right? So to define program to design and implement these controls. Okay, because when we are developing enterprise architecture, security architecture and all, what are all to define, program and to design implementation of controls is what something. So when you want to do this, the first point, the first thing what is that we need to do is to define conceptual architecture for any kind of business risk, which is normally associated or which is normally involved in it, right? So what is the conceptual architecture for business is what something we need to do. Next, we need to even define the physical architecture and map with conceptual architecture. This is also one of the things which normally we need to be performed, right? So this is where we have to be taken into consideration. Next, at the same time, we need to define component architecture and map the physical architecture also. Okay, physical architecture also we have to map here, because conceptual architecture is not only the one, even we need to define the physical architecture also. At the same time, we need to define the operational architecture, whatever the operational architecture procedures do we require to follow, that has to be implemented as well. So these are the four major elements we have to be focused to define the program, to design implementing these controls, etc. But when it comes to the first one, when you try to understand and define architecture for businesses and all that, so there are different governance policies and as well as domains architectures comes under this category to define the conceptual architecture as well as business risk. At the same time, implementing operational risk management architectures, information architecture, certificate management architecture. At the same time, access control architecture, or else it can be an incident response architectures or application security architectures. Or else if we are developing any kind of multiple applications and all, web services architecture, communication security architecture, all these things are something essentially useful to define conceptual architecture for any kind of business risk which is involved in it. Next thing is to define physical architecture and map with conceptual architectures and all. Herein, to define that, we need to identify and create some platform security, because creating a platform for an application is one of the core and important element to be focused more on. At the same time, we need to create some hardware security as well. At the same time, whatever the operating systems we are using, even we need to create some operating system security. Next, the kind of files we are going to implement. So for that, file security is needed. Next, database security, followed by the kind of practices and procedures. All these things are comes under physical architecture point of view. The third one is about component architecture as well as component architecture, which map with physical architecture and all. Because for this, generally, there are different security standards. Normally, we have to use different security standards. Depends on respective country, right? So what are the security standards we require? At the same time, whatever the security products and tools are we going to use? Either it can be for creating any kind of VPNs like virtual private networks or any kind of firewalls or wireless security, vulnerability scanners, right? So all these things are comes under this category. Next one about the web services security, wherein to understand about HTTP protocols, application programming interfaces, creation of APIs like web application firewalls, right? All these things are comes under component architecture mapping in context to the physical architecture part is concerned. Next, to define the operational architecture. This is also one of the core and important element. This is where generally being into security management role as far as the analyst roles itself is concerned, implementing multiple guides as well as the kind of administrative procedures. At the same time, performing configuration as well as patch management, at the same time monitoring and logging, right? So pen testing, access management, chain management, all these things will be implemented under operational architecture defining operational architecture is all about. So when you are trying to understand and implementing enterprise security architecture, especially from a top-down approach is concerned, these are the elements being into security management role as a security analyst role. One has to know. Okay, so how this can be implemented, and because this may be vary, depends on the organization to organization, there may be some slight variations will be taken place. But end of the day, this is all something which we have to be understood with. This is all something which we talk about enterprise security architecture from a security management, information security management side. At the same time, security analyst roles are concerned. This is what and how usually we do. This is all about this session. If you have any questions, please go ahead. Anyone, please.